What's up guys, welcome back to another GGF video, and yes, today's the day I'll be going through the recent build I did called Project Avalanche. Now you probably saw the time that's built. It was a humongous white build, and I did call it Project Avalanche mainly because the system was all white, and this build will demolish pretty much anything in its path. Now there were a lot of questions asked in that time that's built, things about the choice of hardware used, the direction of the build, and so on. So hopefully this video clears it up. I'll go over everything I used, the direction of the hardware I used, why I chose it, and I'll also at the end go through some performance results, because quite interestingly is that this build did break a few world records, so I will talk about that as well at the end. So let's jump in and check out all the hardware. First off is the star of the show and really the main reason for this build, which is the Threadripper 3960X. I went with the 24 core over the 32 core mainly because I don't need the 32 cores, and the 24 core has a slightly higher base clock as well. The fact I primarily use this system for Premiere work, 24 cores is more than enough, and coming from a 7980XC should see a nice improvement in both multi-threaded tasks and temperatures. Motherboard choice is always a tough one, and being so close to launch I knew many boards would not be available, as my selected configuration has been up and running on a test bench for some time already. I managed to get my hands on the ASRock TRX40 Tai Chi quite early, and after putting it through its paces, I've been really happy with it so far. The Tai Chi is a beast of a board while keeping it in an ATX form factor. We find a 16-phase power design with 90 amp chokes, which is one of ASRock's beefiest VRMs to date. VRM cooling is, well, as you can see, quite impressive, with this inch-high VRM stack and 2 fans embedded inside. Another reason I went with this board is due to the slot layout. You'll find 3 full-length 16 by slots, and all 3 operating at 16 by electrically, rather than 16 by 8 by 16 by 8 by seen on other boards. This gives me flexibility, especially when using a quad NVMe card running 4 SSDs, which I will be doing. I can have this card in any of the 16 by slots. ASRock have also enabled PCIe bifurcation on each of the PCIe slots. Memory for the build, I went with G.skill's Trident Z Royale Silver. 64GB running at 3600 MHz should run nicely. I've used G.skill Royales in many previous builds, but just couldn't pass it up this time, and will go nicely with the theme. Speaking of theme, you all know I love my white builds as well as chrome tubing, so why not both? First alterations made were to the case. I went with the new Raijintek Eris Evo, and for some reason I keep saying in my head Idris, as this case is a beast, including support for 5 radiators, dual power supplies, 4 hard drives and more. A perfect solution for a high-end system. The chassis originally comes in black, and I really didn't like the finish, so I painted it white. Before that, a few changes and tweaks had to be made. A note for anyone interested in picking up this case for themselves is in regards to radiator support. 56mm radiators are supported, one at the front and one at the back, but by default the width for installing radiators is about 140mm wide. Personally, this is not enough. EK560 radiators are 145mm wide, and Hardware Labs are 153mm wide. Taking a Dremel to this area took care of this, but this should not have been overlooked. In terms of internal layout, you find a traditional upright ATX layout, but funnily enough, the Eris Evo can handle 2 ITX motherboards rotated 90 with all I/O shooting straight up. I thought this idea was cool, but strangely enough Raijintek did not add this orientation for an ATX setup, so I decided to fabricate it myself. I think this will help with tube runs and running PCIe cards, as this way eliminates any GPU sag. Moving on to storage for the build, and probably another good choice for going TRX40. A total of 5 NVMe SSDs and 6 hard drives are used in the build. A Gen 4 1TB Satin NVMe drive will be used for the OS, then 4 WD Black SN750 1TB drives will run off the ASRock's quad NVMe card, which by the way comes included with the motherboard. High-speed storage is broken down to OS, apps, games, Scratch, and lastly a dump drive. Mechanical drives are used for backups only. These drives consist of 4 Western Digital Black 6TB drives and 2 Western Digital Red 10TB drives. 2 large RAID 0 arrays hold all my video content backups, and yes, you heard that right, RAID 0. To me, RAID is not a backup solution and would much rather have my important data duplicated. Basically, the 2 arrays hold the exact same data, while a third backup is housed on my NAS. My workflow is pretty straightforward. Video work is created on the Scratch NVMe drive, backed up regularly on the faster mechanical array until completed. A duplicate copy is then sent to the second array and the NAS, then the original project is deleted off the scratch drive. As I said earlier, this system is not only used for video editing, but also gaming. I've never really liked having separate systems for different tasks. Video cards for the build, and yes, I did say cards, as I'll be using two RTX 2080 Ti's. Although SLI in 2019 is basically dead, I've had pretty good success with the games I play, and also one GPU in this system would look kinda strange. I've decided to go for a dedicated sound card, and the one I'll be using is a Sound Blaster AE9. I do run pretty good monitor speakers and also a set of Sennheiser HD700 headphones, plus I think the silver design on the card will go nicely with the build. The AE9 also comes with an external headphone amp with a plethora of ports, including a phantom powered mic input, standard mic input, headphone ports and volume control. Powering everything is a Seasonic Prime 1300 watt platinum power supply. I use Seasonic in just about all my builds and their quality is second to none. I've been waiting eagerly for their new 1600 watt we saw at Computex earlier this year, but it isn't ready yet. Cables are of course Cable Mod Pro in a custom kit. I went with white and a silver sleeve mix with silver aluminum combs. Finally, let's look at cooling, and there's quite a bit. Radiators, I went with Hardware Labs all round, two 560 GTR satin white for each end of the chassis. These come in at 54mm thick. Raijintek have allowed 86mm maximum for radiators and fan thickness. I ended up using roughly 83mm, which was perfect. The last radiator is a 480 GTS Slim, which is housed in the top. I could have gone thicker up here, but because I rotated the motherboard 90, all I/O ports have to be plugged in up here. For fans, I went with the white noise blocker 140mm and 120mm, and find these are exceptional performing fans at near silent noise levels. Something to note with the 140mm fans is that they are actually 29mm thick and not the traditional 25mm. CPU block is the Watercool Heatkiller IV Pro, which comes in at a whopping 900 grams. And for GPU blocks, I went with Bitspower's new 2080 Ti reference blocks. You probably noticed they don't have any terminals on the side. These have been moved to the end of the blocks for cleaner runs. As I'm using reference video cards, I managed to pick up two Founders Edition backplates and decided to use them, rather than painting the stock Bitspower ones white. The remaining water cooling gear consists of Bitspower silver shining fittings and two gorgeous Bitspower pump res combos. I'll have the exact models of all the gear used in this build in the description for anyone wanting to know more. Now that's basically all the hardware used. Now for those who haven't seen the time-lapse video, let's jump in and check out the final build. Alrighty, now before I go over the results, I just want to go over some other things first, and you may have noticed I am sitting in a different area. That's because the build behind me that's its daily position, and I didn't really want to move it on this table, move it over to the right where I normally sit and then move it back, so I thought I'd just sit over here. Now what I want to start off first is I want to sort of go over the system as a consumer point of view, rather than just like a sole reviewer's review where you just see numbers, 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 and numbers. So the first thing I want to do is, when I put this system together on the test bench, I basically tested this whole setup to the max. I tested it with 2 video cards, 8 sticks of RAM, 4 hard drives, a sound card, 6 NVMe SSDs, and I just wanted to see how it all went. And that's something that a lot of reviewers probably won't do, and some things they may not pick up. Now straight away I noticed that the sound card I had was the AE9 and it did not work. Just didn't show up in the system at all, not in Device Manager. Now there was nothing wrong with the sound card. I tried it in another system. I tried it in another Gen 4 system, nothing wrong with that. I did about an hour of troubleshooting, reached out to ASRock and said, hey, this sound card does not work. They sort of asked us some details and they basically came back to me and said, look, give us 3 hours and we will come back to you. 3 hours later, I had an email saying, here's a BIOS fix, it should fix it. And I'm like, okay, fair enough. I tried it and it worked flawlessly. Put the BIOS on, tried the sound card and it was detected. So that's sort of kudos to ASRock for sort of jumping ahead and getting that sorted. And you may find that a lot of reviewers may not fix or sort of find those issues. And I'm not saying that there's any issue with reviewers doing that, because mainly they want to see performance numbers, and not every reviewer is going to put, say, like 10 hard drives, 6 SSDs, fill up all the slots and so on. Because that's what I've been doing for pretty much a lot of my life. When I do build my personal system, I normally sort of jam it out to the max. And that was really the only thing I sort of found out or had issues with this build. I did have an issue with Adobe Premiere rendering my final project. For some reason, when I was doing CUDA rendering, it would get a certain point and just stop. The system wouldn't freeze. I would just lose no CPU activity. That would drop to 0. The temperature would drop down, and the time bar would not progress at all. I did find out, probably my fault, I do have 2 separate kits of memory to make the 64 gig. Because I already had one kit, I purchased a different kit. There were different timings. I did set the BIOS to the slower timings, but for some reason, only in Premiere, it cannot run the XMP profile on either with all sticks in. So if I just run non-XMP, the render will work. So I'll probably just grab another kit, or the faster kit, as I know that one works. Now, what I want to do cover is some of the responses in the time-lapse video. I think the main one was, how do I plug in cables? This looks like a show build. Well, as you can see behind me, it's running all up and it's running really sweet. And I actually think this orientation works really good. You may have noticed earlier in this video, I did mention the layout for this chassis, the Eris Evo, and it does come supported for 2 ITX shooting up to the case. So by doing that, the manufacturers by default have had to add cable routing for it. So as you can see, there's 2 humongous cable routing holes that are angled up the top, and the cables just simply pass through, run down the back. Now the only issue with that area is you do need slightly longer cables. So I did pick up some 2-3 meter DisplayPort cables and so on. And as you can see, there is quite a bit of room. You just gotta be careful when I am doing it with the system live. I don't just freely put my hand in, because it will get stuck in the fan. But as you can see, I've got sound card cables plugged in. I have 4 monitors connected, and my network and my USB and so on, and there are no issues there at all. Another thing, probably the side panel. The reason why I don't have the side panel on now is the stock one does run down lower than my, I've got that 2-sided mirror on the bottom. The stock one runs down to about halfway, and I thought adding it on would look a little bit weird. So I'm not sure if I will make a custom side panel that goes around and over that double-sided mirror, but at the moment I'm probably gonna leave it off. I live in a very dust-free environment down here. There's basically no real windows that are open. The door never gets open, so it's actually not too bad. So I will probably leave it off. Another issue I saw, or not, a lot of comments saying, hey, yes, it's easy when you're sort of sponsored with all this hardware, you can build nice systems like this. Well, basically, this build that I did, a lot of it is my own hardware. I actually didn't really reach out to anyone for this project because it is my personal system. I don't normally reach out to sponsors when I want to upgrade my personal system. Main things, I bought the CPU. ASRock sent me the board to check out. ASRock are a great sponsor. They sent me a lot of hardware. Seasonic sent me the power supply. But yeah, I picked up the CPU. This is the first one I got as I was testing on the test bench. This has to go back to ASRock. A lot of other things, I already had some memory from a previous build, so I did pick up another kit. Other things like the case, Raijintek, or I do a lot of work on cases. Raijintek wanted me to check out that. All the NVMe drives and hard drives were used from previous builds. I've got a list of things. The radiators I picked up myself, that was a huge order. If anyone knows how much Hardware Lab radiators are, they are worth a fortune. Sound card I picked up, both GPUs are actually mine. I've used from my previous rig and I bought them for that. So there's quite a lot of gear that I have reused, because I think getting this whole build sponsored for sort of one-time use, because I'm not going to sort of be refeaturing this gear again, because it is my personal system. I don't want to be pulling it down and using it in another build and so on. Now that sort of moves me to what this PC is used for. I use it mainly for Adobe Premiere, Photoshop and Lightroom. I've done quite a bit of Adobe Premiere work on it so far. Rendering times is roughly pretty much about the same as my 7980 XE. When you do enable CUDA on your video cards, it doesn't really put as much onto your CPU. I didn't really bother into doing CPU only, like software rendering, but the times are about the same. You're looking for about anywhere from a 5 to 10 minute video. You're going to be taking about the same 5 to 10 minutes to render, and that is in 4K. But what I did notice is when I was sort of scrubbing around in my footage with my previous system, I did have to lower the quality of the playback video to about quarter or a half, and that's sort of when I speed up my footage. I speed it up to about 3 or 4 times and a bit faster when doing time-lapse videos. But with the 3960X, I was able to speed it up to 6 times and play it back in full quality without it sort of getting up to a stage where it would fill up the memory, the CPU would choke, and it would start stuttering. So that was quite impressive for that. And yeah, another thing I do use the system for is gaming. That's well, what everyone wants to use the system for as well, I guess. I never liked having 2 systems, so this system over here has done a pretty good job. I really just tested a few games. The main one I want to talk about is, of course, Call of Duty Modern Warfare. That is what everyone is talking about. That is the 2019 edition. I just did a few. I've actually been playing that a lot over the last few weeks, but the shots I recorded, I basically run at 1440p. Now I do have a 4K monitor, but I do run a lot of games at 1440p, only because it is 4K 144 Hertz. So I do want to try and get that 144 Hertz out of it. And with 4K, it is really, really hard. Even with 2 2080 Ti's in SLI, it is hard to do. So I run this game pretty much high to maxed out settings, 1440p. And as you can see, I'm running around at anywhere between 130 to 180 FPS. And I guess if I was running at 4K, it would even use less power on the CPU. So yeah, until new video cards come out, I'll probably guess I'll stay at 1440p. But yeah, really impressed with how Call of Duty run. But as you saw in a lot of the reviews, the IBC performance at 1080p was really sort of up the top there. And that moves me over to my Cinebench Result. And I'll also talk about how I started trying to go for some world record attempts, because I was playing around with Cinebench, I was playing around with some overclocking. I was actually just going to try a custom PVO setup, Precision Boost Overdrive, where on these boards you can go with the default PBO, or you can sort of go beyond the limits. And I thought, hey, I've got this whacking hue system over here with all these radiators, let's do a custom setup. So I upped all the parameters and all that, and I thought, hang on, let's see what some of the scores are on the HWBot website, and I wasn't too far off. So what I ended up doing, I'm gonna have to bring up I got some slides here. Right, so Cinebench R20 at stock, you're looking at about 13,490 for a 3960X. My custom PBO, which has the limit sort of raised, I ran at 14,280, and then I managed to get an all-core overclock at 4.45 gigahertz, and that gave me a 15,285 Cinebench score. Now that is actually the current record for an air or all-in-one or water-cooled setup on the HWBot site. So if you do go over there, I'll put some other screens up of those scores. You can see Stuart GGF is the #1. Maybe by the time I get this video up, it may have been broken, but my R20 is about 100 points ahead. So that was at 4.45 gigahertz for that one. And for because I thought, hey, I've done R20, let's try R15. That I think was even more impressive stock. You're looking at 5,958. My custom PBO, I got to 6,102. I'll talk about my custom PBO in a sec, and how the stock and the single core sort of timings work. And for my record OC, I got 4.475 gigahertz, and that gave me a score of 6,802 in the all core for Cinebench R15. Now, second place on the HWBot site, I think was 6,500 and something. So that's nearly a 300 point difference, which I was quite stoked, because you have to remember that this is a system that I use every day. A lot of those people on those sites are pretty much smashing hardware together on a test bench, throwing in minimal hardware, the best hardware they can get, thrashing it for as long as they can to get top of the charts. Now, I've got a system running 2 video cards. It was running 3 monitors, it's running a sound card, it's running 6 hard drives, it's running 5 NVMe drives, and I was able to do that. So I must admit, I did cheat a bit. I did swap out the memory. I didn't run all 64 gigs. I swapped it out for a faster timing kit. I ran a G.skill 3733 kit, and I managed to keep the timings the same and bump it all the way up to 4,600 or 4,600 megahertz for the memory, which is pretty insane, especially for this Ryzen setup. Now, my single core Cinebench R20, stock is about 514, and then I got 525. Now that's not my overclocking record, because that's actually lower than what I can get running a custom PVO. Now you have to remember that with the Threadripper and with Ryzen, if you do your overclock or core, it's going to be stuck at that, and you're not going to be able to go over your single core PVO or at stock when it does the custom custom core frequencies, unless you're going to be overclocking at all cores at over 4.5, which I could not do. I could not get over 4.475 gigahertz for some reason. I was hitting a wall, and that probably brings me to temps as well. With my 4.475, I was at 1.42 volts on the V-core, and I was hitting about low 90s, and that's pretty much your threshold. Over that, if I went 1.45, I was hitting about, well, before I even got there, Cinebench was crashing, so it was up around the 95 degrees. But with my custom PBO, I'm running at about a maximum of 70 degrees, which I'm pretty happy. So that's what I'm going to actually run my custom PBO. With that setup, I can get my all core running at about 4.2, which I'm happy, and then my single core, I'm up at about 4.5, 4.25, which I'm really happy as well, because I think 4.5, and that's why I've got that 525 points for the Cinebench is really decent. I think that's actually better than my 9900KS I had at stock that I tested a few weeks ago. So that's pretty insane for a chip that has 24 cores. But yeah, I'll just bring up the shots of the submissions I submitted to HWBot. So that's my R15 score. You can see in there. I might actually put a link to these so you can actually zoom in, because you probably can't really zoom in on these at the moment. They might be too hard to see. But yeah, I was really impressed with the Tai Chi board. It was an absolute beast. I had no issues there whatsoever. And then if I move over to the R20, that's the submission shot there. So I'm not sure how long these scores will stay up for, number one. There aren't too many up there, but then again, I don't really think too many people have been benching them. But yeah, I was really stoked to actually, I've never actually even gotten close to anything like that before. So yeah, I was really really happy. But yeah, that pretty much it brings me to this the end of this video. Basically, my last little line I want to say, do I need this system, or does most people in my scenario need a system like this? Probably not. My 7980XE did a fine job. The only issue I have with my 7980XE is it got hot. It got very, very hot. Even with a system with 5 radiators, I did have it delidded. I had direct eye, and for some reason the liquid metal, every few months it would just, temperature would get worse and worse till eventually it would thermal throttle. So I would have had to pull it apart to rectify that. And hey, I'm an enthusiast, this is my hobby. I love checking out the latest tech, so I thought, why not jump to the new Threadripper? I've actually never used the Threadripper as my main system, so I thought this would be a good chance to jump in and sort of discover the whole new world of Threadripper, and I'm actually glad I did. I've had a really good time playing around with all this. I found some issues, I've got them sorted. I've actually done some world record sort of Cinebench attempts, which I'm really happy, and so on. But yeah, I just want to thank some of the sponsors who did sponsor this build. It was Seasonic, Bitspower, ASRock as well. So really happy with those. Raijintek for sending me this case. If you are interested in this case, make sure you do go back. And I did mention some of the issues with the larger radiator fitment. I did have to cut a little bit away. But anyway, this has been a long video. I hope you enjoyed it, and stay tuned for the next one.